This demonstration covers the shaper table and some hand routers. Now, because hand routers are much less likely to hurt a student, I'm going to focus on the shapers, a much bigger machine. So the margin of safety for this machine, as well as pretty much all the rest of our machines, is 3 inches. You want to stay, as you're cutting, try to keep your hand about 3 inches away from the blade. So if something goes wrong or I slip, I'm not going into the blade. I'm not in line with that blade. I'm going to slip this way. Or if I'm going across, same thing. I want to stay away. So never cut with your fingers in line with the blade. I never want my finger over here. I'm going to hit the end, or off the end, my thumb and the back will get nailed in the back. So never have anything in that line. When you're cutting, you actually want to stand just off to the side of this machine. Now again, like the table saw or some of the others, if I'm standing in line with it and it kicks back, it's going to hit me in my center and that's going to hurt. So make sure you're standing just off to the side, pushing it through. Now how do you know which way to push? On a shaper, one flip of the switch and I can change the direction of the blade. So it just depends on how it's set up. In this case, as I'm looking from the top down, I can see the blades here. I know it has to spin this way, clockwise. So you always want to go on a shaper opposite the rotation of the cutter. If it's spinning this way and I push that way, it'll want to shoot it across the shop. So you always want to go against the rotation. Now on a hand routers are different. They always spin the same direction. So on some of them across the shop, I've got a lot of routers that are turned upside down and mounted under a table. They all spin the same direction. You're going to be going from your right to your left. And I think that's one of the questions on here. That's number 2. Shaper or hand routers from your right to your left. On a shaper, it doesn't matter. It could be either way. 2 shapers behind me, you've got to go the opposite direction. So it depends on how it's set. So always against the rotation of the cutter. Never have anything directly in line with the bit. That's a safety rule. If I push too fast across the shaper, the blade that's in there, the bit, will start pulling out chunks of wood. Kind of like running it across a joiner too fast or trying to cut and plunge too quickly on a chop saw. You don't give the blade enough time to do its job. And so it's ripping pieces out instead of cutting them off like a knife. Now in this case, if I go too slowly, if I'm just sitting here going really slowly like this and taking my time, this one does build up a lot of friction and you'll end up with a really dark black burn right along the edge the entire way that you're going too slow. Now in the middle of my cut, say I get about this far and I have something comes up and I've got to stop. A disturbance, you got an itch, you got a scratch, something is in your way. If I ever have to stop, make sure to pull it away from the blade and then do what you have to do, and then I would completely start over again instead of plunging in where I stop. Start over and catch up and then finish your cut. And the reason of that is if I stop, now I am going too slow. I mean, stopped is obviously too slow and I get a bad burn. So I don't want to burn my board because it looks bad and it's really hard to sand out. So if you ever have to stop, pull it away from the blade. Are you allowed to use all the routers? All the hand routers are just small machines. Yes, you can use all the hand routers. But all the shapers, no. There are 2 shapers. You can see this one has 1 air hose, 1 vacuum hose. I have 2 shapers in the shop that have 2 hoses connected. They're the much bigger shapers. This blade is fairly small. It's about this big around and spins around. On the 2 larger shapers, those are about this big around and they're about that thick, just a massive amount of metal spinning around that I am too nervous to have beginners use. Now when you're an advanced student, I'd like to watch you use it, but I do allow you to do it. But if something goes wrong on those 2, I want to be the one to take care of it instead of you having to deal with it. So rules for shaping. This one is set up to do a decorative edge all the way around, like a drawer front. You know, you put an edge all the way around it, or a plaque. But how do I know where to start? Well, first of all, I need to know, do I need a miter gauge? If I run this through, this thing will dip into the blade like that, and it'll cut out this big round cut. Anything that's less than 6 inches wide, I want to use a miter gauge. So that is right behind me, right here on the wall. Set that in right here. Now it's safe. Thumbs behind, fingers on top, and I'm going to run it across. But do I start on an edge or do I start on an end? Here's how you can always tell. The blade's cutting this way. As soon as the blade hits the end of this, it's going to rip out the end of the board just a little bit, and you'll get what's called tear out. But now When I turn the board and run it this way, now I can cut all that tear out, and I actually remove it from the board. Then I do the next end, same thing, cut, and I get tear out. My last cut has to be an edge. So the rule for order of shaping is always do at least one end before I do one edge. Now the best way to do this, cut an end, pull it away. Flip it and cut the other end, pull it away, and then I would do both edges. As long as my last cut is an edge, usually that's all you need. So in this case, because the ends are less than 6, I have to cut the ends with this miter gauge. I would not use it to try to cut this. It's too big. So it would actually hinder me. It would be in my way. So I would set this aside and cut by hand my 2 edges. So here's what it looks like. Let's put our best face down. And we turn it on. And again, because I don't have the vacuum running, you're going to see some pieces coming out. But that's normal. Turn it on right here. And we get a decorative edge. Now I flip, do it again. Good. Now I can put this back and do my 2 edges. Again, my hands are on the outside. Flip it, do it again. And now I have a nice decorative edge all the way around my board. So some of the common mistakes on this machine, fortunately, we haven't really had any major accidents on a shaper. I have seen when I taught at the junior high a kid get her cuff caught into the router machine, but we were able to turn it off well before she got pulled in. So she was able to pull her arm out. But I've never seen anything bad on a shaper, thank goodness. But some of the things to remember, we make a lot of sawdust. So like all the other machines, if I put my board on top of that, first of all it wobbles, but secondly it's up off the table and I don't get my cut lined up right. The other way, if I have it against the blade, or against the fence, all that sawdust will move my board away from the fence just a little. Now I have a gap. And again, I don't get a straight cut. Now in this case, if you cut and you look at it and say, well, that doesn't look right. Now blow away the sawdust and now cut again, it will correct it. Go ahead and go over it as many times as it takes to make it look good. On some of the other shapers, I've got 2 particular shapers when we use a door. One of them makes one design and the other one makes an exact opposite of that, and they mate together, kind of like this. Now, if you've got sawdust under your board, one of them is raised up the table a little and it cuts, the other one is correct. Now instead of being even when they match together, one of them is going to be higher than the other. And they match together, but one's sticking out. Now we take those pieces and we're stuck having to sand them over and over through the wide belt sander. So to save you that time, make sure there is no sawdust on the table. As far as how fast to push, we talked about what happens when you go too fast or slow, but you want to go evenly. Remember, you don't want to stop and do this, because that'll give you a burn. Put your hands on it and evenly across like this without, don't come out the end and go boom like that and it'll take off. You nice and evenly across the blades. Now these are nice and sharp, so it should give you a nice smooth cut. Some of the other questions on the back. Your board has to be tight against the table and the fence. That's one of the reasons we get rid of all the sawdust. Fingers on top. I don't want to do this, nothing in line with the blade. And the shapers, really, there's 2 kinds of wood you should not ever put on against a shaper or router, and that's particle board or plywood. Because those are made of a lot of glue and pieces of wood pressed together, that glue tends to dull the blade really fast. Particle board will just disintegrate. I mean, you run it across and there's really nothing left of it. It doesn't do a good job. So this is just for wood, just for solid wood that we have in the shop. This happens to be alder. The other 7 shapers in here all have their own particular setups, but this demonstration is just giving you the general rules for how to use a shaper. Always go against the rotation, make sure there's no sawdust in your way, and cut evenly, and you'll get a nice, clean, decorative cut every single time.